Thank you, Linda.
Lovely words by the previous lady. This is my mother Pam, my brother Howard. Her father died of dementia during the pandemic. Ken was born and bred in Wallington and Surrey. As a teenager, he loved cricket. He represented Surrey and the south of England during that time. He gave us all a wonderful life during his years and spent an awful lot of time of his working life in the former Eastern European countries of Yugoslavia and Poland mainly. Unfortunately, dementia did see him depart us, and he'd had it for very many years. He worked in the computer industry, and but when he retired, he didn't even want a computer in the house, which was quite interesting, because he was fed up with them. During the pandemic, it was probably extremely difficult for everybody involved, no matter what ailments that people had, but especially with people who had dementia. It's bad enough for the best of times with it, but during the pandemic it was probably made it much, much worse. So for all the carers, the people here today, the trusts, the Dementia Trust and the project itself, and I'm sure we'd all like to say a really big thank you to you and for inviting us here today to give these memories. Thank you very much.
There it is. Fortunately, we did have a little bit of liquid sunshine, yeah.
Ted Young, who some of you might know, he was very involved with Guild Care. He was very involved with Guild Care, and he used to sing to the people, and particularly to the dementia groups. And he loved it because he would see them come alive and remembering the songs that he was singing and singing along with them. And he died in April 2020 at the beginning of COVID. And I want to read a piece that I just wrote about that day, and then I want to read one of the two poems I brought. And I warn you that my poems are quite sad, but they do end on a positive note. It was on the 23rd of March 2020 that the Prime Minister told the nation that we were going into a lockdown to prevent the strange and frightening thing called the coronavirus spreading across our land. It was on the 24th of March that I was told over the phone by my husband's consultant that the treatments he had been receiving for the last 4 years to control and maintain his condition were no longer working, and he now must be on palliative care. 2.5 weeks later, my husband's earthly journey came to an end. Those 2.5 weeks were probably the worst of my life, made far worse by the presence of COVID and the fear of what it might do. Nobody could come and help me with my husband as he rapidly deteriorated and needed full-time nursing care. No friend could come and say goodbye or give me a hug or help me to lift him when he was unable to get out of his chair. The hospice at home service kicked in with district nurses coming in the morning and later in the afternoon. But during the long hours of the night when he needed to get up and then was unable to get back to bed, I was alone. The paramedics were wonderful at weekends and went far beyond the call of duty to help. I was so relieved when a bed became vacant at St Barnabas, where he died 2 days after admission. And during my time there, the care for Ted was wonderful, and I felt so cared for too. But it was a very different hospice to the norm, with a very low staff ratio and everyone in masks and gowns and unable to touch me when I needed comfort. Ted died at 12 noon, and about an hour later I walked out of a back entrance alone. The sky was cloudless blue and the sun as warm as a summer's day. There was a strange emptiness about the world, with very few cars on the roads and all the shops closed. It was eerily quiet. I felt as if I had gone into a kind of waking dream from which I would never wake. this was the beginning of the road of grieving that I must walk alone. Because of COVID, only 8 friends could attend his funeral, all spaced out across the chapel, and afterwards attending outside and calling messages of love and comfort across a huge divide. But despite all this, I'm so grateful that I did not have to go through even worse, as I would have done if Ted had been admitted to hospital. I'm so thankful that he never caught COVID, and I was able to be with him and say goodbye when the time came. Of course, it was not as it should have been in normal times, but it was better than it could have been, and it is very much better now. So I'd like to read this poem that I wrote at 2 o'clock in the morning, in the sleepless hours. I heard a bird singing, this little bird on the roof opposite, singing his heart out. So I wrote this poem, which, as I have said, will start dark, but it does get light in the end. The dawning. There is something kind of threatening about that first morning chill, when the world waits in the moment, cold, dark, still. There's a time of awful wakening from a deep and troubled sleep, with the tormented reality that what we have is what we keep, that all the pain of yesterday seems in this hour to grieve for the faith that in the life before gave us courage to believe. And the hopelessness that now has dawned is always here to stay, and the God who used to love us just turned his back and walked away. It is well known in establishments familiar with death that the grip of life is fragile in this hour, when little breath is afforded to the living, and the time to say goodbye creeps softly in the darkness, leaving only what and why. It is the time of darkest anguish, but it's just before the light, when the eastern skies are waking and chasing out the night. Then faintly, imperceptibly, a song as yet unborn, riding on the morning with the golden wings of dawn, and gaining in momentum while the crimson ball rolls on and the queen of night is fading, fading, almost gone, until the mighty chorus of that glorious feathered choir, singing alleluias from the crypt up to the spire, and lifting, lifting, lifting the darkness of the soul, touching earth with hope again, a reason to be whole.
Had Alzheimer's, which he passed away before the pandemic in 2015. But I actually do think myself lucky that we're not going through that journey. We didn't go through that journey in the pandemic, and it must have been so much harder for everyone. So, but thinking of all the carers, it inspired me to write a book for carers, because I know all the feelings that we struggle with, and it's a book of poems and